a little bit about us, for those of you who are not familiar, True Classic started back in 2019 as a pretty amazing brand of trying to make everybody look good and feel good with the best t-shirt in the world. We used to be called True Classic Tees. And what made that t-shirt super special is that it was fitting uh, really well for guys. It was tight around the chest and arms, looser around the torso. It felt really soft. It still is soft to the touch, very breathable fabric. And it was offered at a really good price point. And the product market fit blew us away. We bootstrapped this brand and grew it past 9 figures in 2 short years profitably, which is pretty remarkable. For all of you who operate brands, you know how hard that D2C game can be, especially when you're going into a commodity space. And there were no X factors. There were no celebrity endorsements. There was no unbelievable product innovation. There was no bunch of VC money flowing with that kind of like growth at all cost. It was hardcore execution. And frankly, one of the biggest things we have that goes for us, aside from an incredible product and incredible marketing team, it's the creative assets that we have developed. It's the way we tell the stories. And I know we're all here to talk about creative, so I'm excited to dive deeper. And myself, I'm just here to cheer on this amazing team we got. I'm here to support everybody on their day to day and make sure we keep doing amazing work.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ben, for that great intro. Now, I want to dive into hiring because a few days ago when we chatted, you said something interesting to me. You said that you thought the interview process was broken, especially for D2C teams. So I want to understand how at True Classic you approach hiring differently.
Okay. So first of all, I would say is that this is a people's game, right? If you're trying to build a brand, you got to build a team. And the quality of your team is going to be as good as your weakest link. And you need to really make sure that you're taking a very serious approach of like, how do you identify that amazing talent out there? How do you attract them into your brand to kind of like build that amazing vision for people's dreams and visions to kind of like fit within? And so on the interview part, you know, we've all been interviewing for some time. It's very easy, right? To ask some questions and give some answers and sound smart. But the reality is that until you start working with someone, you really wouldn't know whether they're going to be a good fit, whether they're going to like working here, whether they're going to create amazing value. That is what every employer is hoping for. So we restructured the interview process here to focus on 3 things. It's all under the umbrellas of aptitude and attitude. The first 2 are aptitude areas, which is wisdom and intelligence. And the third thing is a set of attitudes. We have 6 that we care about a lot. On the wisdom part, that's the starting point. That's what you bring with you to the job, right? That's all your experiences to date, your perspective, your judgment in creative's world, like your work to date, kind of like how you approach it, your portfolio. And that's to me a starting point. The intelligence part is your learning curve. It's your critical thinking. It's your analytical skills. It's how quickly can you grow from wherever you start. And your attitudes is kind of like what ultimately makes or breaks everything you got as a human. And for us, attitudes we believe deeply in is, for example, grit and resilience, because work is hard. And a lot of the time you need to really push through and you need to persevere and you need to be sufficiently determined, right? If you're a creative, you might not get it right the first time around. What happens when it doesn't work? Do you go for the second time? Do you iterate? Are you relentless, right? And so those attitudes we've identified for us are what we believe to make, you know, those kind of like A players that we love and cherish. And those are the 3 lenses we look through.
Yeah, I think about the quote too. How you do one thing is how you do all things. So when I'm interviewing people too, I'm looking for, you know, what level of conviction they have, how methodical they are in their process, and how they showcase empathy. Are there any specific experiences or companies or even hobbies or extracurriculars that you look for that kind of signal these positive attributes for high performers?
Yeah, you know, it's a great question. I actually feel like experience is really overrated. And if you think about entrepreneurs, and even think about the world we're in right now, we all have to take a massive step back and completely relearn everything we know, right? AI is changing every single thing that we all have been quote unquote doing. And even though our industry is relatively new, it's being redefined as we speak, right? Even if you're
I
creative
say
in
that
the
it
world of,
changes like every 6 months, pretty much,
but
like
it's
our
kind of,
industry. Yeah.
and it continues on a very exponential learning curve, right? So in fact, if you actually might bring that perspective or experience or wisdom of how you used to do things, that actually might be even kind of like playing against you, because in today's world, you kind of have to relearn constantly and bring yourself up to speed on like the right thing, quote unquote, of doing things today. And so that's why I'm going back to like, do you have that attitude? For example, one of the things we care about is intellectual curiosity and growth mindset. Are you that kind of person who's very innovative and is trying to just get 1% better every day and goes out of your way to listen to podcasts and join the Motion webinar to learn from everybody and ask kind of deep questions, right? And just be all about self-improvement. And then how quickly do you grasp to new concepts? How inclined are you to adapt new technology, right? Or to leverage kind of like new tools, new processes? And so it's a little bit interesting, because I think that hiring in today's world, at least, has been very kind of like resume heavy. What companies you worked for, how many years of experience you have, show me your past work, which is somewhat indicative. But in reality, if you're thinking forward, right, it's like, this is your starting point, but where can you take me from here with everything you've got? And for example, if you're in creative, right, like, do you have a big ego, or do you care more about kind of like getting it right? So basically, like, do you care about being right or getting it right? If you're the getting it right person, there is a much higher likelihood that you will succeed here. If you're the being right person and you're just fighting for your idea or your angle above anything else, we're going to have a little bit more friction, because we are a getting it right company, and our number one value is move the needle, which is all performance driven and moving kind of like metrics, right? So just to give some color.
Yeah, I think too, especially as a creative person, and when you're putting creatives out there to see how they're going to perform, anywhere from 70 to 90% of the creatives and messaging and new angles you're going to test, they're not going to be bangers. They're not going to, some of them are going to be complete flops. But some of them, aren't going to, like, those aren't going to be winners. So I think it is really important to have people who are dedicated to that iteration and love more of the process, as opposed to being the person or having that ego that like got them there. Do you have like a process at True Classic for then how you can assess if someone is going to have that kind of aptitude? Or is there a part of your process when hiring that you give test projects, or what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me actually even think about if I can share that thing, because I created a few quick slides here, but we can think about this one together. So let's start with the wisdom part, right? So that's the starting point. So that's how you think about all the boring interview processes, right? Give me your resume, tell me how many years of experience, where did you go to school? If in the creative world, right, like show me past work, show me your portfolio of assets, like ads that you've been behind, all the stuff that we can see kind of like on the surface, and that's where we project it from a starting point perspective. Intelligence is like, how do we vet your ability to learn something that you don't know about, right? And it can be star-like questions like situation, task, action, result, as like, tell me about a time you had to learn something new, and kind of like, what did you do? What was your approach about that? But sometimes we might do an assessment, and we will give you a new data set that you haven't seen before, and we will see what you're coming back with on the other side. We actually do assessments for everything we do over here at True Classic. There's no role we hire for without a practical assessment. And we want to see how quickly you can learn our business and how quickly you can adapt and kind of like your approach. And the last part here, which you see, is the attitude, which is kind of like over time, pending the attitudes you show, if those are the great attitudes we value deeply and believe are very important, even though you might be on a certain curve from an intelligence or learning perspective, you might completely outperform. And so as an example, I mentioned, like, I'll give you the number one thing, which is grit. I cannot emphasize enough how important grit is when it comes to employee performance. Because at the end of the day, that person who is just so determined to succeed, who is so relentless in their approach, who is so exceptional and extraordinary, right? And if you think about exceptional as being the exception, extraordinary, you have to be extra, right? That is gold, right? And so what I have found is that in order to find gritty people, like you have to have it within you. This is not something I can teach. That's not something I can coach. And so like I'll give you like one example of one of my favorite questions is I asked people to tell me about a time where they had kind of like their lowest low, or they dealt with some extraordinary hardship. And I would say kind of like, what was the situation? What kept you going? And how did you ultimately overcome? And I get a lot of color from those questions, right? Do they show vulnerability? Do they show that strong why and willingness to persevere, right? Like did they push through and overcome like really meaningful challenges? And you know that like hardship builds character, it builds grit. And you know that those people who have dealt with hardship before are that much more likely to succeed the next time something is going to feel a little hard. Because if you think about the gym analogy, and we're all here about hiring athletes into True Classic, the weights never get lighter. You get stronger lifting heavier weights, doing another rep, doing another set, right? And you need to have that mindset of I'm going every day to the gym, getting stronger and getting better at my craft. And I'm that kind of person who's going to show up no matter what. I'm disciplined, right? So that's just kind of more of an illustration of how we evaluate different parts.
And that's interesting too, because I think it goes back to your earlier statement about how like the team is really only as strong as the weakest link, and like you need to have a group of people who experience that grit together, or else that process is going to start breaking down and maybe morale is going to get a little bit low. I want to talk a little bit about the roles that you think agencies or brands specifically overlook in hiring. One of the things that I've been hearing a lot about more recently, especially on the creative end of things, is the importance of hiring copywriters on teams, or even the importance of hiring project managers to actually manage those projects. And I'm kind of curious to see if at True Classic you've been making any of those hires, or if there's another hire that has really been an unlock for your creative process.
It's a great question. And honestly, my perspective has evolved back to like being, getting it right versus being right with, it probably evolves every week. I think my perspective is like, so, what should I call it? Like I'm very open-minded. And so I'll tell you my 2 cents on that, and then we can talk about specific roles and agencies and whatnot. So first thing first is like, how do you open a role? And it has to be articulated pretty well of like, why do you hire? And to me, it's like there is a business need and a very specific thing you're trying to accomplish. It's either an opportunity you're trying to pursue that you're not currently capitalizing on, or a problem that you have identified and are trying to solve. And so that will create kind of like a list of, call it areas of accountabilities, things that you need to address. In this particular case, maybe you said like we have a problem within the creative team. We're not operating efficiently and effectively, right? We have lots of ideas, but we fail on execution, or things fall between the cracks, or we've done such an amazing job on the videography and the photography, but then the copy fell short or the scripting wasn't great. So you're like, okay, that's a problem. But then the question is like, how do we solve that? Now, we have a little bit of a hierarchy over here. We're a very lean team internally, very lean. And the first thing we're trying to figure out is technology. Is there any technology out there that can help us address the business need or capitalize on the opportunity or solve the problem, right? Creatively, it's sometimes more difficult because technology is not necessarily going to replace that. But like at the same time, I would say like, on copy, I think there are incredible AI tools these days that might become your best copywriter, to be honest, if you just are feeding it the right information. And then your copywriter is having a lot more leverage with technology and just reviewing, revising, refining, but they don't have to start. I think anybody writing in 2024 should not start from a blank kind of page.
I agree with that 100%.
It just should never be the case, right? And so it's just a little bit of okay, can it be met? And then maybe you have one copywriter, but now they're elevated because they're powered by AI. The next thing we look at is externally, right? If it's not technology, if there is no tech to solve the business need, are there external partners? Are there external agencies to your port? Are there consultants, right? Like whoever that can help enlighten us before we bring a person kind of like in-house. And that's for a lot of stuff that we, and that's how we've built a fairly large business, and we are only about 50 something people in-house, which is pretty wildly lean. From like
I'm surprised by that, knowing your revenue number and how much creative you put out. So congrats on that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're literally north of 200 million, and we are only 50 something people in-house. And our team is amazing. And our team is a team of leaders and strategic thinkers. And it just goes back to show that you can do a lot with fairly limited number of people, right? And that actually helps us because it keeps the team more connected. As you add more members to the team, it becomes more complex. There's more relationships that people need to kind of have and communicate with one another. So if it doesn't make our beer better, we outsource this type of thing. So anything that's tactical, anything that can be resolved outside. And then we think about, again, the strategic things in-house. If we want to do something net new, and we will open a role, and our expectations are really high of anybody that joins the True Classic team in-house. This is a team of A players. This is a team of go-getters. This is a team of industry movers and shakers. And those are the people that we're looking to attract and retain. And frankly, they are hard to come by. They're hard to find. That's just the reality. And I think a lot of people who are in this industry can attest to that. So that's how we're thinking about it from like a hiring perspective, from roles within creative. And to answer some of your specific questions, I think project management is very important. I think that execution is everything. But I don't know. I think, again, there's a lot of tech solutions out there of how do you enable a remote first company with better process. And if the process is really good, you might find that the project manager is needed less, right? Because you have a system that helps hold everybody accountable. As simple as in like, here's everything that needs to happen. Here's who needs to do what and when. That organization alone can take you really, really far, right? But what happens in a lot of environments is that we lack the process. We lack the steps. We lack the checklist. We lack the ownership. We lack the deadlines, right? As simple as it sounds. And what happens with project managers is they bring that forward and they instill that sense of accountability. So pending the team and how thoughtful their processes are at, I think the power of a project manager kind of like increases or decreases, just pending how solid the operational frameworks are at.
Yeah, I agree. And I think too, like when I look at like agency processes, when there's tons of different teams, maybe then a project manager would help a lot more for that accountability versus just managing one team and really like going all in on one brand. But we're talking a lot about operations. So I do actually want to dig into your creative operations process at True Classic. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to show you from a bird's eye view the way that I think about creative process, right? This is something I've shared before in these motion calls, but at the top here, we can see that I've boiled down the creative process really into a 6-step process, going from researching. So this is where you're doing your in-depth customer research, then road mapping. So you're taking all of those great ideas that you got through your brainstorms and your research, and you're actually mapping them out and prioritizing them. Then it goes to post-production, QA. QA is when, you're looking for the dumb, stupid mistakes, but you're also looking for performance opportunities to really increase the longevity of that creative. Then you're launching content, analyzing it, and then it goes all the way back to the beginning, research. So my question for you is, how similar or dissimilar is your creative process at True Classic? And what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar. And I love the main buckets here. I think research is so important. And I think it's actually really underrated because creatives, what they do best is they create. But direction and strategy should all come from research, from consumer, from data, right? That is really where the rubber meets the road. And even if you go, like one of the core values of True Classic is go fast, because we believe that done is better than perfect. And we believe in speed. And we think that speed matters. It matters a lot. But if you're running super fast, but not in the right direction, you may not run it. You may as well not run at all, right? And so that first bucket is actually, I can't emphasize the importance here enough. And I think that when I look back at our work, and not every single thing we do is amazing, right? But if I'm thinking about the stuff that really resonated, it always was rooted in a really deep consumer insight. And that consumer insight was so valuable in getting every single person around the room really kind of like on the same page of what are we trying to communicate. And it's typically as in like, hey, what problem are we trying to solve? Can we articulate a problem statement? As simple as that. And can we really refine what is that problem for that consumer? And, a lot of people will do research and then will say, okay, the target consumer for True Classic is a male between 25 and 54. And I'm like, la, da, 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 da. I got this, but that doesn't tell you anything. Who is this person? How do they feel? How do they want to feel? How do you make them feel? Or how do we want to make them feel, right? And how do we take those really like emotional elements into account when we come up with a creative idea. That is what's going to make a big difference. And actually, I have one example from Father's Day. If you want me, I can try to play it. I think we have it in the deck. And just to show like one thing of how powerful kind of like consumer centricity can be in advertising. And I can share you this example that has been done brilliantly by my team here, and big shout out to them. They're literally best in class. And we can kind of talk about a little bit of the consumer insight there, and we can play it together if that sounds good.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's try it. Let me know if you can hear it.
But I don't need new clothes.
Dad, we all decided to buy you some true classics.
They're tied around your arms and chest and turn your dad bod into a father figure.
But do they have jeans? Do I have to go to the office? What if I do start working now? Well, what if you can't keep changing me?
No, we want you to change yourself.
They're so comfy.
All right. Was there echo, by the way, or is it just in my ears?
Slight
Maybe.
echo, but I think
Okay.
I think we got it. Yeah, yeah.
All right. So let's talk about this for a second, right? Father's Day comes around, right? And like, one approach that any team can take is like, oh yeah, it's Father's Day. Let's make a promo and let's tell them what products we got, and it's buy it for your father, right? Another is to go and say, let's go fucking deep. Who is that father? What does it look like in their family? What is the wife want for the father? What does the mom want? What does the son want? How do we bring that story to life in a way that if you are that father or any family member for that matter, you feel it and that resonates with you, right? And we literally created all these personas and created this like family thing, of like, let's make it a family gathering. And by we, I take no credit for this, just to be clear. It's just a bunch of genius creatives on our side. And Nicholas, it was just amazing, and the whole team over here. But I'm just saying, like, we took a very different approach, and we told the family story for Father's Day. And that video went viral, and it's in my opinion, one of the better videos we've done recently. But if you really zoom out and start unpacking this, it's not just about thumbs up rate or whatever, hook rate or whatever you want to call it, or the playthrough rate or this rate or that rate. It's about how do we tell a story in a way that ultimately resonates, right? And even if you think about the algorithms these days, and if you think about Instagram or TikTok and whatnot, you'll hear them a lot about the importance of shares and how much shares are basically ruling the algorithms these days. What do people share with other people? It's either things that they want to do together, or things that they are like kind of like shocked by and are like, you wouldn't believe this, right? Or things that like they got entertained or educated by, and they want to kind of like share that learning with someone else. There's a few of those kind of like elements that people do that. But in this particular case, like, so many people can either see their dad in it, or they are the son in it, or it's the wife in it, or you name it in it. And that makes for great content. And that's just kind of like to bring that consumer centricity forward. Like, think about that for whatever brand you represent or work on, and whatever moment. If you dive really deep into this consumer and try to think about a way to kind of like illustrate that in a way that resonates, that box of research will turn into gold in all the steps to follow, whether it's the scripting or the photography or videography or the QAing or the editing or any part of the equation. But the core has to be really right for it to ultimately land. And if you don't get the core really right, all the rest of the work is frankly like not as effective or productive.
So how do you make sure that your teams are injecting this customer centric approach to creative throughout the process? Is there a certain person where like that's their job to make sure that happens, or is that something that has been inspired for all team members to check in on at every step in the process?
It's a great question. So it starts back with, remember when I talked about attitudes? I said one of the things I'm looking for is intellectual curiosity, right? I want to see what questions people ask, and I want to see how curious they actually are. Not because I asked them to ask, or not because I, challenge them, but I really want to know, are you really consumer centric? Are you really curious to understand that person that you serve? Do we all realize that we're here to empower people to look good and feel good? And if you don't know what makes them or empowers them to look or feel good, how can you do that, right? That's why we all exist. We're not here to just create content or spend money on TikTok, right? And so
Yeah.
That is where it starts. And you cannot train that, by the way. I can try to encourage that, but someone needs to be just intellectually curious and like the right human, right? That I am here to serve. I am here to understand that person. So beyond that, there's a few tools. So one tool is, I think at this point, not as underrated, but used to be underrated, is the post-purchase survey. But a lot of people just use it for, they just use it for attribution, right? How did you first hear about us? What brought you to the site today? Those are boring questions. I mean, important questions, not to be clear, boring from a consumer insight standpoint, because it doesn't tell you much. But you can ask deeper questions. For example, like, who did you purchase for today? Is it for yourself or someone else? And who is that person? Is it your husband or your dad or your son? Like, you can just go a little bit deeper, and then you start actually profiling people and understanding, like, well, we have a gifting audience. Let's see who this gifting audience is. And I'm thinking right now, Q4, right? Like, you got to really understand your gifters. You got to really understand when they come to your site. You got to understand what pages they land on and what they're adding to their cart and what they're buying. Like, there's a lot to understand about them. But beyond anything, and all the surveys, and we do consumer surveys. So we do the post-purchase survey, which should be table stakes for everybody. And if you don't have it, look into this, think about some good questions to ask, and start learning about those consumers. Beyond that, we're doing dedicated research. So we'll have sometimes we want to double click into something and we want to learn more. So we'll fill down, we'll do all that stuff. My favorite, though, above all, is that every time we're doing All Hands, which is once a month, we do it digitally basically we do it quarterly in person, and then every month in between digitally. So we meet 12 times a year. We bring the customer in, and every single time I bring another customer. And so, and I do interviews, and I sit there. So most recently, Jared came in here, and it was an incredible conversation. We talked about it for almost like 45 minutes. I pulled up like the Shopify history. I looked in different orders, asked a bunch of questions. Like, how did you first hear about us? But like, what was it? What made you believe? What was your experience when you unpacked the package for the first time? Did we meet expectations? Did we not? How can we do better? And then I shut up, and then I let everybody ask a lot of questions. And the questions were amazing. The product team starts to engage with the consumer or with Jared on like the types of products and fabrications and colors and what they want to see more of or less of, or why this or why that. And the brand team is talking about, angles and creative. And even like the first one was, we learned that he came from TikTok, and like the creative was like, what ad did you see? And what got you? And he was talking about, there was one ad literally 3+ years ago about like push-up bra for men, and like how it like really hit him, and like first thing, like, and he clicked and bought, and you have just so much color from talking to people. Guess what? You're trying to solve their problems, right? You're trying to understand them. You might want to just talk to them and see what you learn. And as simple as that sounds, it just doesn't seem to be that common of a behavior. And I think to myself, like, we are all consumer brands, right? Like, we need to talk to those customers. This is about those customers. This is about those people. And so those are some ideas on how to do that. We also bring people to trial our products. We bring fit models to fit every single product and every single body type. We're not doing kind of like grades. So we'll bring a smaller person, a medium-sized person, a larger person. They all also have different preferences. What we might think is like a good fit for a medium might not be the good fit for the 3XL. And we got to talk to the 3XL person, and we got to understand them and how they feel about their body, and how they feel about their right fit, and how they feel about the company, and like a bunch of different things. So as simple as it sounds, could speak to your customers. You're going to come on the other side way smarter. And one of our values here is lead with empathy, and it starts with obsessing over the customer.
And I think that's actually really great tactically. Like, a question that I always think about is, how can you get your teams to be bought into that level of customer obsession? And I think that this is a really great action item, actually, because you're saying, oh, like, you bring in customers to these workshops, essentially. And then you start off the interview, and then you allow other people to jump in and ask questions that they have questions about, which I think is something that could be really impactful. Because like, especially if you have multiple different teams being able to chime in and build off one another, I think that that's something really awesome, and something I might even start trying to do. I used to do the jobs to be done framework, which is essentially based on the notion that, hey, every single customer customer or potential user has a job or like a problem that they need to be fixed. So we would send out surveys and also conduct qualitative interviews. But I really like the aspect of bringing them in person. I just see this massive shift right now with being able to like literally rub elbows with your customers. And I think that that has a trickle effect on your teams. So we only have about 15 more minutes left. I want to shift really quick to Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and how you're prepping for that before we open it up to Q&A. But when we were talking a few days ago, I thought your POV was kind of interesting on how you start prepping for Q4, how you think about Q4 prep. So I'm going to turn it over to you to reveal that.
Yeah, for sure. I think people honestly over kind of I don't know, stress about Q4. I get why. It's an amazingly important kind of like time of year. But the reality is that it's just going to test your execution across the board. And I actually don't think that like what you ultimately do in Q4 is that dramatic. It's like what you're doing throughout the year. And so to me, the Q4 prep is like year round, right? All year round, we collect emails and we collect phone numbers and we advertise and we build stories. And Q4 is that moment where just a lot of this effort, it comes to fruition and quote unquote converts, right? But it's not to say that like what you're doing in Q4 is the Q4 impact. And so what I would say highest level and what we're doing every year, kind of like entering the quarter, is like you got to get the basics right. As simple as it sounds. You got to be in the tip-top shape, right? And basics to me is like your pixels, your conversions API, your cart, your checkout process, right? Like simplifying the journey, your welcome flow in email, your welcome flow in text. Like every single element, as core as it sounds, is super, super important, because what happens at the end of the day in Q4 is like your traffic spikes and you have a lot more people that are running through the machine. And so any little thing that you can improve from that journey, from someone saw your ad on Facebook to they landed on your landing page, to they went to the PDP, to the PLP, to the PDP, to the cart, to the checkout, to the post purchase, like every single step like that has so much opportunity for you to improve it just a little bit. And if you do, your whole machine is becoming that much stronger. And so we actually are going really deep into all the different areas of the funnel and just see if we can, strengthen any little area that might be a little bit of a squeaky wheel. And that's how we think about it, like at large. And then from a content perspective, look, we do those fun videos and fun stories year round. It's a big gifting moment. So I highly obviously recommend for everybody to study your gifting audience and who they are. We definitely see a huge shift in gifters coming kind of to the site, and the gifters need something different. They are gifters. What is their emotional need, right? They're looking for the perfect gift. They might have a budget. They might be more motivated by a review of another gifter that told them how amazing True Classic was and that it's the best gift ever and that their person loved it, than the person kind of like talking about for themselves, because they are in the gifter seat. So that is a huge work stream, always on, but Q4 is a big area. And beyond that, on advertising as an example, like, it still stands to be true that you're doing kind of like those fairly low quality, if you will, like static, like up to X% off or whatever. And like, that is still like the tried and true Black Friday, Cyber Monday strategy, because at the end of the day, at that point, all it is like you're trying to monetize this funnel that you've been building year round. And you just want to let people know we have a promo going and it's pretty steep, and that's all they need. They don't need now. It's not time to build your funnel. It's not time to make people learn about you for the first time. It's time to monetize, and it's time to land grab. And a lot of people who might have been skeptics year round now have this moment where it's like, what? This steep promo is all I needed to actually believe and try it. And so that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I think too, like my perspective on Q4 as well is, for you, it's not the time to build the funnel. It's also, for me, not really the time to do as much creative testing, right? It's like really the time to double down. And like you're saying, like those quick and easy promos, this, you know, the percentage off statics, like those are something that continually like are a top performer year after year. Also just leaving on your evergreen ads. I still get questions from some brands about, oh, should we turn everything off and move it all to like Black Friday, Cyber Monday promo? And it's like, no, keep your best performing ads on, maybe put a dot whack or a sticker showing the promo on them, get some of those simple, easy statics. But otherwise, it's really just about capitalizing on the moment. Because like you're saying too, like, you know, some people who may have been on the fence before are ready to buy. And that's just because they already have their credit cards out. Like, you know, when, like for me, right after Thanksgiving, I'm like sitting down and I have my credit card out and I'm like, all right, like, let's see what you got. And like, I'm so in the motion and like have already put in the reps buying for brands that it's really just about like showing the offer and like sending the signal.
100%.
Yeah. So I do like, you know, thinking about the gifting audience segment specifically. Is there a way that you like to nurture them like throughout the year? And how does that strategy change then during Q4?
Yeah, I mean, what we're trying to do, and I think there's, by the way, a lot of room for us to improve on the gifting side as a brand. We are evergreen kind of in our efforts to make that better. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a different funnel, and starting by like, who is that gifter? So for us, and I think for a lot of brands, it's a lot of women, right, that love gifting, and they love gifting for lots of different people. Maybe it's their spouse, maybe it's their dad, maybe it's their brother, maybe it's whoever. And she is a different consumer in our world. We don't have, you know, anything for her. We only have stuff for him. But we have a whole lot of females coming in Q4. And they are a different persona. They have different needs. They have different wants. They need different messaging. And so we just think through that as like, okay, every single part of this funnel, like how do we attract her how do we prospect her in the first place? If she's the gifter, right? And what types of hook would resonate with her? Or what type of advertising in the first place? And what type of product? And like, what is she kind of looking for? And what's her budget? And so on and so forth. And then on the website, you know, it might be small tweaks, like, you know, you might have a CRO, conversion rate optimization element that says like, this is the #1 most liked item or most popular item. But now you might need something different that says this is the #1 most gifted item, or this is the highest rated gift, or do you want a gift wrap, or do you want a gift card, or do you want help with finding the right size for that person? Like, the whole world changes a little bit when you're not buying for yourself. And so if you're really being thoughtful and intentional in every step of the funnel, it can make a big impact, right? And like, my dream state is to continue with that personalization kind of like throughout. And so as an example, in a post-purchase survey, if you learn from the post-purchase, in the post-purchase flow, if you learn from the post-purchase that they bought for someone else, and I can say, hey, Dara, how did your dad enjoyed their True Classic tees, right? Anything we can do for you, right? That's a small little touch, but it's actually really cool, because now you're like, whoa, like they really think about me as the gifter here. And I want to make sure that I'm happy as a gifter with how my giftee experience went. And, you know, like that makes me feel heard. That makes me feel valued. That makes me feel good, right? And so thoughtfulness, intentionality in every part is what I would always vouch for. And we forget how different it is, right? If you're buying for someone else versus for yourself.
Yeah. And again, that's kind of why I wanted to end this interview like on that moment, because I think that is like honestly the biggest change for many brands moving in to Q4 is how they're thinking more about that gifting segment. But now what I'd like to do, Ben, is we have a ton of questions to go through, and I want to pick out a few of them so that we can, you know, interact with people directly. Oh, here's a good one. I'm kind of curious on this one. Let me see if I can get these Q&As up here.
All right, Q&A.
Yeah,
There's a long list. You pick. Actually, there's some.
Oh my God! Yeah, there we go. Ooh, so I use True Classic all the time for my creative inspiration. So where does your team look for creative inspiration?
I mean, you already mentioned Foreplay earlier. I think it's a great tool. I look for ads everywhere,
Yeah.
everywhere. And by the way, not just apparel ads. I'm just looking for good storytellers, right? For good ads that tell a compelling story that I feel is like, consumer first, that resonates really
Mhm.
well, and doesn't have to be necessarily in clothing. The other thing I would say, social media for sure. You can obviously go on like the Facebook ad library.
Mhm.
You can use tools like Foreplay and others. You don't have to necessarily only follow brands. You can also follow creators. For example, I don't know if we'll have time
Yeah.
for that. It's about 2 minutes, but one of the creators that Ryan, who is the founder, chairman here at True Classic, landed on the other day was Zachary, and his handle is MD Motivator, and his tagline is "Kindness is cool," and the guy's just creating the most insane content, and all about just doing good in the world and spreading kindness. And it was so touching and moving for us. And we're like, we need to work with this person. He's telling unbelievable stories, and that wasn't even our own team, right? This is like, let's find a creator that we believe in.
Yeah.
And we did the most insane collaboration with him. If we have time, I'm happy to play that video. And it turned out to be just like one of the best things we've ever done as a brand, and a really amazing moment for us to show up for people and empower them to look good and feel good and spread kindness in the world. And that was from inspiration of just finding a creator that we believed in, that aligned with us in terms of kind of like values and what we're trying to do as a brand. And that turned into just like a remarkable story. So if we have time, I'll play it. But that is kind of like my 2 cents there. And I would say that it's not necessarily that we look up to specific brands or creators. We look up to specific pieces of content. There is some brands, inclusive of us, that have some amazing content and some not so great content, right? And so it's like you have to kind of like apply your own judgment of like what great content look like, right? And does it evoke the right emotions? Is it centered in consumer? Things like that.
Yeah, I'd say like my process is consistently like going back to the platform and seeing like what's getting the biggest emotional reaction from me or triggering the most empathy from myself and my team. And that's how I direct them to do that. I know Melissa actually just shared the link to that TikTok that you guys collaborated on so that people can go look at it themselves. She just shared it again. Thanks. Another one that I want to ask is, how do you help your team work through creative burnout? I think too, when we're looking at big sprints like we are now, burnout is a phrase that I hear quite a bit. So I'm curious to hear on the True Classic team, how you guys mitigate that.
It's challenging. There's just no real way around that. I think that like by helping people reframe, I am a big believer of psychology, and I'm a big believer of like framing is everything, right? Like, is your glass half empty or half full, right? And so if you're feeling, if your team member might come to you and say like, I'm feeling really overwhelmed, right? How can you help them reframe that? And maybe it's like, congratulations, you're in high demand, you're valuable, you're needed. Right?
I like that switch. Yeah.
And it's like, that is an amazing thing. Now let's talk about this together and figure out what is on your plate. How can we prioritize that better and move forward in a more manageable way? Right? Like you just helped like look at the same situation from a different lens that is a way more positive, right? It's like you mentioned Q4, and it's like, I can't believe I have to do this. This is just too much. And you go and say like, you don't have to do anything. You get to do this. This is a privilege. There's so many people who would love to be able to do what you're doing, right? And how do we kind of like view that in a really positive way? Because it truly is a privilege, and there's truly like so many people who would love to work on the True Classic Creative as an example. And beyond that, is just being really supportive. If you need time off, take time off. We're very autonomous. We're remote first. There's no like set hours or set things that people need to do. We value more than anything like moving the needle. If you need to go out in nature and clear your head and come back refreshed, like absolutely do it. You don't have to ask for permission. It's like it's on you. And those are just some tips on how I think about it. But I'm going back to the grit conversation and why it's so important. Because work is hard. But if you are a growth mindset and you find joy in up leveling, in building that stamina, in being able back to the gym, like lifting heavier weights and feeling stronger because now you can handle that. Like that's great. That's what's gonna keep you going. And again, you gotta obviously take the breaks when you need to take the breaks. Don't just keep hitting the same, heavy weights and hurt yourself. But yeah, come back tomorrow or the next day and keep training.
Yeah, I really like that. It's interesting too how much the company culture can actually help frame people's mind for burnout. I once worked at an agency really early on in my career where Q4, and especially Black Friday, Cyber Monday, was like this all day, all night affair. And it was very tense and people were very serious. And it just like everyone just kind of felt on edge throughout the process. And then when I switched agencies, people were like, oh yeah, like we're going to work a little bit longer hours, but honestly, like it's awesome to see the results come in and like crush it for our brands. And it's really not that big of a deal. And I remember if like going into that first Q4 and I was like, oh my gosh, like there's another way for this. So I think that like your creative leaders can really set the tone for like how the work and how crunch times feel for the rest of your business.
Yes, I agree.
Let's see. We have another one. I think this one is kind of funny. What is your controversial take on finding high quality talent? Do you have a controversial take on finding high quality talent?
Oh, I have lots of controversial things, I guess. What is my controversial take on finding high quality talent for your team? I don't know if it's controversial, but I think it's a fair game, right? That's kind of like where my mind goes, as in like, at the end of the day, employment, right, is a company and a person feeling like for a given amount of time, it makes sense to join forces for the employee or the talent, right, to find joy in the work and in helping, in our case, like people to feel good and look good and obviously get compensated, and the company to benefit from the talent and from everything that person brings to the table. And I think that fair game nature of it means that sometimes you might get people from, and we get a lot of it, I get a lot of it from amazing companies who you might be, really good friends with the founder or the CEO or whoever, and they want to come work for you. And what do you do about that, right? If they love it and want to do that, it's a fair game. Is it controversial? Perhaps. I mean, I wouldn't go and poach from any one of my kind of like friends' companies, but when they raise their hand and they want to come join the work, perhaps it's controversial, but I think it's fair game. And I would say even right now, like we're looking to hire, leaders to lead the brand. We have a brand director role. We're looking for a leader for the creative director role. And it's interesting, every single time you have an open role, it's just interesting to see where people raise their hands and where they're coming from. But and it can feel a little bit awkward, right? And especially in our world, like we're all super tight little industry and you kind of know lots of people, and it's just interesting. So that's probably where my mind goes. It's a little awkward, I guess, if you end up like hiring from another company where the people
awkward,
really well.
But I feel like it's inevitable, like just because the industry is so small. Like I've worked with, like I'm seeing people's names pop up in chat. I'm like, oh yeah, like I've worked with them. Like we've worked together, and it just kind of all like as you progress, like becomes smaller and smaller, especially the more you move up in your career. So I think it's an inevitability, and like having those honest conversations and not being too precious about it or like taking it too personally, I think has also been key in my experience.
It's never personal, which I think is what everybody fails to sometimes realize. It's just never personal. It's more like just, let's flow with life and help people, capitalize on their full potential and do the work that makes them happy. And that's all we can do,
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to have two more questions. Let's do this one. I think this is a good change of pace. What's the biggest red flag or green flag that you've had in interviews?
Interesting. Red flag. It's a good question. I would say that the big, most people when they get to me, they're professional interviewers. So I don't think I'm like spotting crazy red flags, but I would tell you that I've gotten crazy red flags from backdoors on talent. I won't name the individual, but as far as like a person who slashed their colleagues' tires in the parking lot and like things like that, you know, where it's like, okay, if we learn about those types of things, it becomes really concerning. Green flag is all attitudinal. That's to me what gets me most excited when I see entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial individuals who want to make a difference, who want to solve a big problem, who brings that passion, that positive energy, that can-do attitude, that excitement. Like, it gets me excited. Energy is very contagious. And so those to me are like, I'm looking for personalities. Like, one of my questions is like, what do you want to do? Imagine money is no object. Imagine you don't have to do anything. What do you want to do? What does it look like? And you learn just so much about who people actually are, what gets them moving, what gets them going. And if I hear the right things that I'm looking for, those are to me the types of green flags that tells me that they would do really well over here. Yeah.
I love that. T, by the way, one more final question. And I think let me, hold on, guys. Okay. I'm going to do the highest one that's been up here is, when researching, when do you look for, or where do you try to find consumer insight? I think you've given some really great examples about post-purchase surveys. Are there any other like types of websites or AI tools that you try to help leverage when looking for more consumer insight?
Yeah, I would say post-purchase survey. I would say dedicated surveys. It can be through your email list. We use Qualtrics. I think a lot of consumer insights too can happen just online. Are you reading reviews? Go look around, see what the 1-star reviews say, what the 2-star reviews say. There's a lot of insight there. There's a lot of problem statements that you can kind of like extract from that. Bring the customers in when you go out in the world and you ask people like, have you heard about True Classic? Have you tried us before? Like, turn this into a conversation. You can learn every day from people in the wild. I certainly do. And so it's almost like a mindset rather than a tool, in my opinion. There's just a variety of tools that are at your disposal.
Amazing. Yeah, I love that too. So I'm going to stop sharing these. There we go. I can see you like full screen now.
Dara, Ben, you two are absolutely incredible. Like, thanks for coming and sharing so much knowledge. Dara, you hosted incredibly. Ben shared so much insight, so many insights. Chat, like, let's just show them some love. There's been so many good things. Let's just end with some love here, okay?
It's time to ship more winning creative with Motion's creative analytics platform that helps you scale winners into unicorns and helps you figure out where your ads might need just a little more help. Join over 2,100 teams shipping winning ads with Motion like Fiori, True Classic, Hexclad, and more. Get a free VIP tour today, and you can see how Motion can help your creative strategists and your media buyers speak the same language.